Again in studio. This time about world and of course also how me see my family, which of course are all the people in the world. All the people in the world, we together are very poverty, but if we apply some science to it, that's not that poor anymore. And of course, we can build also philosophy for science or technology. At least we are improving in something. Not easy to understand all type of grand thematics, but also to understand different forms of development ethics. The ethics are actually much more important than all the art together in the whole world, because all the maps in the world and property are just a program and nothing more. For sure, if you think about anything more, probably you are living in fiction. There is a lot of lawyers that live in fiction their entire life. Of course, you also must be careful about the different forms of the code, but also make exception for the better safety. Of course, you can also build a better simple forum of safety together with simple forum of the exercising every day, but also with deep breathing. And safety probably is related to more things, also to the vitamins and different forms of the health thematics. And of course, it's not easy to understand each temple in this world, which of course is some sort of a room capped with different forms of the plants, of course, which are some sort of service for the better air. Not easy to understand the air conditioning systems, which are actually very difficult and sometimes not systems at all. Probably it's better to understand simple form of the focus on a simple air and going out every day for 2 hours and breathe. The breathing is actually more and more important in life if you are looking for some safety. Also to distance from all the streets or the cross streets because are extremely dangerous and probably also illegal if you code with them. To understand the different forms of git safety, it's not easy. And it's also very important to understand simple forms of the experience of safety while you are walking anywhere. To understand selling safety, of course, those are some sort of experts and tips that people give. But in this form of psychology, of course, any of the country could benefit, and of course, also different forms of law can build a better and better psychology for the safer zebras around the world, and of course, also better life of safety. Not easy to understand, to have privilege and right, to build better philosophy. To understand simple mistakes in this world, it's not easy. And of course, if everyone would be my son, me would support safety. If everyone in this world would be my daughter, I would support safety. If everyone would be my wife, I would support safety. And if everyone would be my husband, in case I would be a woman, I would again support safety. Of course, there is a lot of mistakes in safety while people are driving, but it's very important to understand simple forums but also to observe different situations. If you have any type of people around yourself, probably that's more a politic thematic or maybe even political thematic. And of course, you can also observe how they are driving in their free time. Understanding to admire them might be very unwise. Like it's very unwise to admire people in a world or how rich they are or what they did with their brand company or what they provided for their customers because on the end the admiration do not means anything. You could not admire anyone from this world because that would be some sort of a fiction of your head. It's very important to understand the code sometime, but if we are thinking about something more prosperous and understanding also the charity in your city, probably the safety is really important. There are different forms of signs and symbols that also represent different forms of the policy that, of course, build a better society. And the society is easy to obey simple rules made by simple philosophers. There are different forms of destinations for the code, but of course, a lot of companies do not use simple code. And now you know how complex the driving with navigation is, so you should never use navigation. Maybe navigations are too personal, and you see, they are like a movie, and they are not safe at all. Of course, safety is not easy to understand by people, and there are a lot of problems that people think when they think about something safe. When you think about the dangers in world, you want to be more safe, and it is very, very difficult to build a better life. Starting and ending life, it's probably the natural form of life. And now you also see the danger of anything natural. Probably, if you think about anything natural, you should also think about alcohol. The alcohol is actually also made from natural things, but it's extremely difficult. If you think about different forms of the simple wine, how dangerous that could be anywhere in the world, and also illegal if driving. You see, it's very important to find a way for the philosophy for your company or brand in world. Also, if you are modeling, not to be drunk in love all the time, but to appreciate every moment. That's actually very important. If you respect every street in the world, of course you will see that streets include fashion, but also poverty, but not winning. You could not own any street in this world. But of course, you can build better safety in the simple forums. It is very important to understand that adults live in prisons, and if you don't understand that, probably you'll never understand fiction, but you'll also not understand the reality and how the populations look like. You could not own any daughter, you could not own any son. If all the people in the world are my sons and daughters, me could not own anyone. It's very important to understand, to take care of everyone, but also to forget everyone under different forms of constructions. Of course, it's also dangerous to think that you must work for everyone because then you are going to become exhausted, especially if you are coding more and more and more. And the coding in work, it's not what it seems. It becomes very, very difficult, but in modern time also very, very complex. Sometimes also to apologize to the coding word because sometimes it's too difficult, especially for models. But once you see how limited the legal terms are in this world and how limited some lawyers are, maybe you'll start to code a little bit more. There is millions of problems with traffics in this world. And of course, there is also a lot of forums that are people making in this world. It's very important to understand you should not code together with the field. Sometimes it's very important to understand simple forms of the pools the celebrities are making, but are extremely, extremely dangerous. It is also very important to build a self-defense system if you are coding. But of course, also very important to build behind the scenes on a stage and behind the stage if you are modeling professional. Know that different forms of the vital parts in life are very difficult, but people are just burning for a new opportunity. But you must know, if you want life with peace, you should build nothing new. Build something like from 2000 year or something like 2000 and 2001, 2002, 2003. Of course, it's not easy to think any form of self-driving cars because those might be actually made from different forms of the ledgers and circuits. To understand fast drivers is actually very unsafe and you do not want to understand them. Sometimes it's just better not to drive and go walking, and the other time it's just better to go drive. Of course, you can also use a bus. In bus, most of people do not use belts, but of course they should actually use those belts for their own safety. Understand different forms of the transport. It's also very important in bigger cities. Of course, the charity can do a lot for better transport in government cities, but also to understand different forms of the philosophy that affect different forms of organizations that also work together with different forms of politics. It's not easy to understand the conditions of those organizations that might, of course, own a lot of company, but that's not necessary. To satisfy every need, it's not easy. And of course, the simple forum of the Lord can help you to bring more forums to the planet and engaging in more safety work for people. There are different forms of the place in this world, and of course, every place have a limit. You must know that, of course, the cars should not fly and could not fly unless there would be a rockets. It's very important to understand also the fiction in electronics because the fiction might means everything. That, of course, tells us how reality is actually limited and the people that are actually simply thinking about loss or safety in loss. This is how to avoid mistake and to think about loss every day because that might be your own poverty but also your own problem of disease sometime. To understand safety, of course, masks are very unsafe because they are just masking people. Probably people should use Elmex and thousands of different micro ends drinks for a better mouth. Of course, better tongue and more clean tongue is very important in life. And sometimes it's also important to understand the simple ways of life, but also to understand simple forms of the charity. To understand simple forms of the responsibility is also important, but also to apologize to some people and also to understand simple forms of the life. Nothing is fatal and end in life if you are building better forms of films. And of course, you are going to meet a lot of beautiful people if you understand those conditions. Safety also have a lot of limits if you are working in anything in healthcare, but it's also important to understand simple form of the influence of different forms of the picture. Of course, anything could go wrong with different forms of the owners, and it's very important to dance and tap into the life together with simple forms of the buffeting solutions. There are different forms of the chains, and of course, we are not all aware what do it mean to drive safe or to drive extremely relaxed, but maybe sometimes also a little bit more focused. To have a lot of critics about the cars that are actually making out of fabrics is actually sometimes important for building in different forms of fabrics. It's like some sort of if you are making different forms of the cemetery for a house or simple balcony. There are different forms of balcony, different forms of the room if you are building something, even a block. But of course, that's not as complex as to build a blockchain in crypto industry. To understand simple forms of every aspect in different forms of design is actually not easy. But also it's very important to understand simple forms of the safety together with Taoism, which is extremely complex and you should not share it too much because it actually leave you speechless and you'll never understand it if you are sharing and sharing and sharing. Sometimes you should actually leave the people and build your own peace. Cruelty of different forms of people that are more known sometimes is some sort of animal instinction that's actually driving people crazy. Some sort of fans and some workers are also crazy, but some also in love with technology. So it's actually very hard to think anything about different forms or ahead about anything or what is coming. To understand belts, of course, it's not simple because there are millions of different types. And do not confuse that with any forms of safety because not all belts are extremely safe. Of course, do not drink when you are driving, and that's also very important to represent on different forms of the posters. Maybe it's very important to take some ethics in every country or in every organization in the world and in every charity foundation to understand safe driving because safety is really important. But of course, that's not on the apps. To understand simple forms of the devil, probably it's also important. And probably the biggest devils are, in fact, the luxury cars. It's really important to understand simple forms of cars, but the luxury cars are really the devil. So, about safety, probably sometimes you should just stop some people in world, but also some things in world. But sometimes to stop yourself from doing too much, because if you are working too much, you are not going to bring or solve anything. Probably it's better to build a several of philosophy because this one it become psychiatry precision for your company or for your brand, which is of course enormous value.